I'm Jack Delosa and welcome. Tonight I'm joined by Steve Wozniak, the man who around the entire world needs little introduction, of course the co-founder along with Steve Jobs of this brilliant and beautiful company. Steve Wozniak, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, your story is incredible. You and Jobs started Apple in 76 and you sold your calculator as the seed capital.
Actually, even steps leading up to developing the product and starting the company, they're great too. You get my book, I Was. You'll be amazed. But yes, but getting the seed capital, well, we actually believed we'd be a big company. We had a product that was worth it. Yeah. But how do you even find money? And lucked out. Steve Jobs was the businessman. I was the engineer.
And you sold the calculator, $500. You got half of it, I understand. You got $250 of the 500. Is that right? He never came back and paid you the rest.
I don't know what you're talking about. There was now the very first Apple One. We weren't raising big money. We were just doing it out of our little pennies that we owned.
It was the machine that you owned. It was your prized possession, and you sold it to develop.
Oh, I sold my Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator for
$500. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, and Dave Evans, I think that was his name. He never showed up to pay me the other half. But that's okay. That's okay because I didn't care. I'm not the sort of person who was going to chase him down and pursue it anyway. I just don't do that with money.
No, my point is it's amazing that Apple started from you selling your calculator and getting $250.
And Steve sold his van, and that money was just to put into a product that we knew was extremely short-term and not real. It was the Apple I computer, but we were showing off the Apple II before we ever shipped an Apple I, and the Apple II we knew was the big computer. I designed it as a computer from the ground up, and the Apple I had modified something else very quickly. Yeah. It wasn't really the intent to make the great computer.
The journey from that, and I also understand you didn't start in a garage, like the movies suggest.
Well, we never really had a company in a garage. Yeah. We never had companies like a bunch of work tables and people on phones and texting each other. We never had more than one or two people in the garage, and we barely used the garage for a few hours a week is all we needed it for. But you have to start in your house. Yeah. So the garage is right to symbolize that we had a humble start and no money.
Yeah, yeah. From that to the most valuable company in the world at one stage.
Now that's the harder one to buy.
Well, it's such an extraordinary story, and it must be such an extraordinary journey just as a human being. What was the most challenging aspect of that journey for you?
Well, the most challenging aspect along the way, of course, was when Apple was rumored to maybe be going out of business. The press just beat us up.
96?
Turns out that we had enough capital that we were going to survive through that 95, 96 period. We were going to survive and come out profitable again. We had enough loyal followers. And when Steve Jobs returned, actually one of the lucky things he had was now he had the ability to run a company and the strength, but he had millions of loyal customers. And he didn't have that with Next.
What do you think? What were the key differences during that decade where Jobs wasn't around and then after he came back?
The key changes, Apple lost this formula of being way leader of the world and showing the world new ways. What we had was very successful markets. A lot of people that loved our products so much than others because they were different enough, and educators in schools. We just owned the school market at that time. But we kind of, over time, we just said, we'll just keep the money machine going. And we'll rev our products, but we're not going to make them special enough or give them a special appearance in mind, whether it's real or not, in any technical way in the product. Yeah. So we did lose a lot of that formula and needed Steve Jobs to bring it back, although it took a long time even for him. It really, nothing came back as far as the worth of our company until the iPod.
You talk a lot about, particularly in the early years, how you just wanted to be a computer engineer. It was for the love of the work, and you loved the work and the process more than the love of money. Steve Jobs obviously talks a lot about artistry and how different teams that you guys developed throughout the way were.
Oh, that wasn't Steve Jobs at first.
No.
He actually, the reason Steve Jobs talks about artistry and a lot of marketing concepts is since he was not an engineer, but he wanted to be the important person in the company. You have to make yourself important in some way. And a lot of the way is being the spokesperson, having the words, speaking a little bit of futuristic talk, and this artisan is so important. That had always been a big important part of his life too.
Was that authentic to him as a human?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so how important was that, in your instance, the love of the work? How critical was that to Apple's success?
The love of the work. Well, we started the company with a product that I owned totally. Steve Jobs had nothing to do with it. He hadn't been involved in any discussions about making it, and I developed it all on my own. The Apple II computer, the first time arcade games would be color and software, the first time in history. We knew this was the making of a big, huge company. So I mean, we started with our product already done. It's not like we had to start a company and then develop it.
Yeah.
So, and that was going to be all of our revenues for the first 10 years. Okay, and it all came from my computer. I didn't want to put my face out. I didn't want to be like a front of Apple. I didn't want to get in politics and people would shove me aside. I was a shy geek. I just want to go in my laboratory. I want to keep inventing.
And you raise an interesting point around that in terms of the Apple II was you required to raise some external funding, and Mike Markkula came in, and he provided a bit of commercial direction around the business stuff early on as well.
Mike Markkula owned as much of the company as Steve Jobs and myself. He was older and more experienced. He was a mentor. He taught Steve Jobs and I who you hire to have a technology company. We didn't know, and what their roles and responsibilities were and how to interview them and what to look for. And he really did the business starting of Apple, but more than that, he was a marketing person. He'd been an engineer and he'd been in marketing at Intel, and he taught us we're going to be a market-driven company because big companies like IBM are successful from that. And he spoke a lot of marketing ideas, and Steve Jobs picked up on those because Steve Jobs, not being technical, found it a better way to something he could understand, and he could even repeat, and he could have, it was a lot, marketing is a lot of opinions. Not, whereas engineering is, it works or it doesn't. It's mathematics and science. So that was Steve Jobs' role. He learned a lot of that from Mike Markkula. But you know, over time, Steve started being the spokesperson for why you should own the Apple product, the Apple II. Why should you own it? He was the main marketeer, if you will. You know, his public comments about it were so important, and he was on the covers of so many magazines. Every one of those magazines sold Apple IIs. That helped us all.
Yeah. And it seems like early on you always had a high degree of talent when it came to computer science and engineering. It's really interesting, and I'm sure for everybody watching this video, to hear that even early on, Jobs was still figuring out the business side, and Markkula came along and helped him. How did Jobs develop himself as a business person?
This is difficult to say. What does a business person do? The title, first of all, at first Steve Jobs didn't have a title. He didn't qualify for one. I was vice president of engineering. I qualified. But a business person is called an executive. What does executive mean? It means you execute. What does execute mean? It means you get things done that make money. You achieve goals and make money. Steve worked on 3 major products, 3 main computers after the Apple II. He was trying to make his own computer. Great computer is in my mind, and I can create it and make it, and all he had was failure. He failed to execute with the Apple III, the Lisa, and the Macintosh. Macintosh was our biggest failure ever, really, to this day. So you say as a businessman, he was talking like a businessman. Speech, yes. Maybe some visionary ideas, but his visionary ideas were way out of place with time of what would make them economically profitable for Apple. And the Macintosh was a great vision, but because by being ahead of its time, it didn't execute. It didn't make money. Our stock dropped, hugely in a week.
I suppose, I mean, from 96, 97, for that period, Jobs came back as the CEO of the company.
Well, first of all, Jobs left the company.
Yeah.
He was not fired, but if he could have been funded to build any computer he wanted to, including his next computer inside of Apple. But here's the problem: he had bad relationships with so many people that you can't be around people you have bad relationships with and actually get it done. So he left Apple to do that, and then he worked on Next for a long time. But in that time frame, he learned what it took to be the CEO of a computer company, making new products, getting them tested, getting software, the best people in the world developing them. So when he came back to Apple, he was really ready, and we were like a platform for him. It's just that he was even concerned whether Apple would ever be saved. Because he came back to Apple. Did our value of our company in stock price go up? No. He hugged a new computer. Did our price go up? No. He introduced a new operating system. Did our company go up? No. It was the iPod. And the iPod he did a strange thing. He took an open step. Steve usually likes to keep things totally closed, totally controlled. All the user experience and everything is the way he speaks of it. But we wrote iTunes for Windows so that a Windows user could buy our iPod and have the iPod experience as well as a Macintosh user. We didn't do that for Android, but that made us a wealthy company and got Steve Jobs billions in stock and jet airplanes and all. And that was the start. But the iPod was such a great device. I judge companies by their devices. So to me, that was just such a beautiful, beautiful device. It was worth it. And now we had two companies, a computer company and a music company. And Steve had really done that all on his own.
And if we look into the future now, you wanted to talk about science fiction becoming science fact. What do you think today is science fiction that's fast becoming science fact?
You know what, we've done a lot of things with today's products that are so far beyond what I think was ever written in science fiction. A lot of the third-party apps, especially in the Ubers and Airbnbs, I just don't think they fit in. So what science fiction today might be real tomorrow? A lot of people talk about things like flying cars, and and you know what? I don't believe that's ever going to happen. And they talk about having your own personal spaceships to fly. That's never going to happen. It has to do with, it gets down to certain things, too much energy, too much cost in all the technology steps and the mathematics and the science. You can't violate the laws of physics. So I do think that we're going to finally have electric cars for real, but that's not science fiction even.
Yeah.
That's really just, over time we've had electric cars in the past. Are we going to have self-driving cars? That's interesting because I'm not sure. I think science fiction always dealt with, you either have a driving car or you just have little buses, equivalent of a bus that gets you there. So every airplane, but all airplanes have been self-driving for ages.
Yeah.
So that's hard to say how much science fiction it is, but it's coming. It's getting close.
And education has always been something that you've been passionate about. How do you think technology will enable better education in the future?
I had hoped that just by having these devices with computers and the internet, that they would change how smart, how good an education our kids got. And I didn't see it really happen that way. I didn't see kids coming out of school, primary school, any smarter than they'd ever been. Yes, they could do things they could never come close to doing 10 years before because they have the internet and they can do searching. But no, they weren't smarter in their thinking. So I'm thinking, how do you get better education? And I boiled it down to everybody learns the same things, the same time, the same hours, the same weeks, and it's the only way that one teacher can handle 30 students. And I thought in my own teaching experience, 8 years of it, from one-on-one teaching to 2-on-1 to 6-on-1 to 22-on-1 to 17-on-1 to 30-on-1, lots of experience I had. Basically, one-on-one can never fail. And if a computer could be a teacher, well, we've got Khan Academy and lots of other online education supplies, but it's only curriculum. And as nice and fun as we make it seem, it feels like I'm at a machine that's sort of leading me through stuff that I have to do its stuff. It's not like a personal friend. So if we ever had computers that were like personal friends, true artificial intelligence, cared about you, knew everything in your life, suggested one thing, took you in certain topics and avoided others that you don't like. That would be a huge change. Would it make kids smarter or not? I don't know. But I like to think of things that have never been done, because then if I think of something that somebody else could have said for the last 200 years, we need goal-oriented education projects and we need to make classes more fun. I could say those things, but millions of people have already had the chance to say them, and I'm not smarter than them. But so I always think of what doesn't exist today. A computer that knows you consciously as a person, looks at your face and becomes a friend of yours, doesn't quite exist, and yet we're getting signs of getting closer to it. Maybe that could be a teacher that would let every student at an early age go in the directions they favor as fast as they want, or as slow as they want if they hate it.
It's amazing what doesn't exist today. Steve Wozniak, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thanks.